Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
Doing well. Back down from the mountains. Watched the game in the mountains, thanks to YouTube.
Shout out to YouTube. Shout out to YouTube TV. But anyway, no free sponsorship, though. No free ads. We'll bleep that out. But anyway, thank you so much for coming and listening. We are here today to break down the Packers' 30-14 win over the Tennessee Titans in Tennessee. Dad, the Packers moved to 2-1, tied with the Lions for second in the NFC North. Right now it goes Vikings. Lions have a slight tiebreaker, I believe. Then Packers, then Bears. So moving up a little bit. But Dad, we're going to be talking all about this game, what the Packers did well, what the Packers didn't do well, what we want to see them maybe grow in. But before we get into any of that, just wanted to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you hear here today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out, whenever we have new episodes out, roster moves, injury reports, stats that we find when we're doing research for these episodes, other content from other Packers content creators that we enjoy, one-stop shopping for everything Titletown. And then subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. And we are back on YouTube. We have figured that out. Shout out again to Cousin Eli for helping us out. Additional production credits there. But yeah, so subscribe, leave a rating, leave a comment. We would really appreciate it. But Dad, anything else, or should we just get into it? Packers win 30-14. How did you feel after this game? Because I the last game on versus the Colts, I was like, oh wow, we came away with a win. And then this one, I was like, dang, we kind of kicked some ass a little bit.
Yeah, for the most part, we were kind of humming in this game. Maybe a little slow start, I suppose, on their first possession, but we got a fast start on offense. The offense was kind of rolling with
Malik Willis. Malik Willis is actually pretty good. Like he's actually
so they had looked up. So like one of the highest rated QBs on the season right now.
I believe he doesn't qualify based on attempts. I think, but if he did, he'd be second or third. We're going to talk all about this game, Dad. But let's just start out, go through our usual routine. Stay in our guardrails. And let's just start with the biggest moment of this game. Normally we start with injury update, Dad, but I didn't see any in the, didn't see any in the flow of the game that there were any major things we need to talk about. We'll know tomorrow, as of the practice report, who's, maybe nursing one or two things, but nothing major in this game, right, that we saw in the takeaway?
I couldn't find anything. I was looking around a little bit. I guess Kraft stepped out of the game for a little while, but then came back in.
Yeah, he's been dealing with that shoulder injury. That's a good point. He did exit the game at one point. He was in that non-contact jersey last week during practice, but he did return to the game. So there is. Yeah, so I
don't remember anything else really mentioned during the game that I could find anywhere. So that's, I guess, the only thing that I noticed.
Yeah, and I guess the big injury update to talk about would be Jordan Love. He warmed up for this game with the brace, just moving around pretty well out there. But pretty much the night before, it sounded like they had already decided they were going to go with Malik Willis, and then that was announced game time. He was going to be out. So we're going to see, because it seemed like pretty close to playing in this game. So we're going to see if he gets medically cleared by the next game, because he could be back, this next game versus the Vikings, which we'll be doing a pregame for that. So we'll be talking about that when the time comes. But Dad, it seems like he was pretty close to this one and maybe good to go for the next one. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think I saw something yesterday. LaFleur said he would start, guess what? Limited.
Yeah. He's been limited. And he said the classic LaFleurism's like, we're going to give him, the whole week. We're going to take it day by day, which is obviously the right thing to do. But so just keep an eye on that. Once again, keep an eye on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We'll be keeping you up to date on all the injury updates.
Don't expect any just straight definitive statements from LaFleur.
No, I don't think we're going to know until like Saturday night when the newsbreakers start tweeting. I don't think we're going to know until then.
Possibly. It's possible to be even later than that.
That's very true. But anyway, Dad, we're talking about this game, though, and let's just start going through our game breakdown, and let's start with the biggest moment of the game. We go by ESPN win probability added, objectively, what was the play that swung the game the most? And in this case, it's exactly what you would think. Jair Alexander's pick six, the first pick six of his career. It feels like he's had one already, but he has not. Makes the game 17-7, goes from a 52.3% chance of winning for the Packers to a 70.5% chance of winning. That's an 18.2% swing. That was kind of the turning point in the game, right?
Yes, and listeners should know that I independently found this same play because we had two competing
Documents, yes.
Documents being prepped for this podcast.
Technology is not always, it is sometimes a barrier to getting things done, but we worked it out. But anyway, yes, it is. That was the play of the game, though, right? It felt like everything turned when that happened. It felt like, like we're in control of this game now. Because before that, it was like, 7-7 up, we kick a field goal. Let's see what the Titans do here. And it's like, okay, 2-score lead, and then from there, it was kind of no looking back, right?
Right, because it was relatively close, and they marched down the field and scored on their first possession. So if that kept going, then it could have been a back and forth game. And then all of a sudden, we're up 2 scores and in control.
Yep. But Ted, let's move over to the offensive side of the football now, though. And let's start with, we like to do our you-know-what sandwich, where we go good, bad, bad, good. Let's start with some positives on the offense, though, Dad. And normally I'd let you go first, but I don't think there's anywhere else to start but Malik Willis, right? I already grabbed this.
I saw you already grabbed him. I did not put him in there, so we should start with the headliner.
I mean, we talked about it a bit already, but he was just fantastic in this game. Last week you can say, he did a really good job doing what they asked of him. He wasn't asked to do too much. It was a lot of just check down, maybe 1 or 2 throws downfield. This game, he was actually asked to do a lot more than he was the previous week. He was just some numbers. 13 of 19 for 202 yards and a touchdown passing. Add on to that 6 carries for 73 yards and a touchdown. So almost 280 total yards of offense with 2 touchdowns. He was second in the league in week 3 in yards per attempt. He was 6th in the league in week 3 in EPA per dropback. And he completed some huge third downs in this game, Dad. 3rd and 14 to Romeo Doubs, 3rd and 18 to Christian Watson. Another great deep throw to Christian Watson earlier in the game. Running for first downs on 3rd down, passing for first downs on 3rd down. I mean, this is it's crazy how we went from 2.5 weeks ago, oh man, Malik Willis, are we sure they're not going to have to add someone to Malik Willis is one of the better backups in the league? It seems like I don't know how we got here, but I'm glad that we got here is all I'm going to say.
Yeah, and it's just more than we expected. And also, as the announcers mentioned during the broadcast, going for it on 3rd and 14 and 3rd and 18, a lot of times
that's the thing.
Even with Rodgers or Love, they would we'll just hand it off and gain a couple of yards before punting. They're go for the first down marker.
There are plenty of teams in the league with their starters who'd be 3rd and 18, let's call a screen, let's get some yards back. The odds of us converting this are very low. They're just okay, straight drop back, Malik. It's time. Go throw a strike over the middle for 20 yards. Yeah, and he did it. And he was just fantastic in this game. A little extra sweetener that it was against the team that, kind of, you could argue never really gave him a chance because, they draft him as a developmental guy. It's clear that their old coach, Mike Vrabel, just kind of wanted nothing to do with developing a quarterback at that stage. He just wanted to ride with Tannehill to the point where even when they needed a backup, they would rather have Josh Dobbs on 2 days notice than, even play Malik Willis and then, immediately draft his successor. And he had not been good for the Titans, but it also did feel like he never got a fair shake. And so I'm sure this felt a little bit, he won't say it, but I'll say it for him. I'm sure it felt a little bit extra sweet to get this win and, outplay the guy that replaced him.
And I'm sure, and I haven't actually delved into this on Twitter, felt extra salty for the Titans fans.
Yeah,
to see the guy they gave up
rough.
For a 7th round pick outplay their starter.
Yeah, and obviously, want to give a lot of credit to Matt LaFleur, Adam Stenavich, the offensive line, the playmakers. And, I think obviously want to give them all the shine as well. I do feel like they have gotten a lot of credit and Malik hasn't. So that's why I wanted to start with Malik Willis. But obviously all of that is also, Matt LaFleur and Adam Stenavich and the whole entire offensive crew, take a bow as well. Tom Clements, the quarterback coach. I mean, all of them deserve a massive amount of credit too, because it doesn't work unless all of these pieces are working in tandem together, right?
Yeah. Situation matters.
Yeah, situation does matter. And I think that's what we've seen so far through 3 weeks. I think that may be the biggest takeaway in the NFL right now is you see what Kevin O'Connell's doing with Sam Darnold in Minnesota. You see what Matt LaFleur is doing with Malik Willis after, he had looked not as viable in Tennessee. It's a lot of times coaching and play calling and, giving these players confidence really does matter.
Yeah, and you see it playing out for teams that are struggling this year as well.
Exactly. But Dad, what was your first positive on the offensive side of the football?
So I'll start with misdirection. Is that they're using. It was a great setup on the first play of the game where everybody's expecting the Packers to go run, and they have the fake pitch to Jacobs and most of the flow of the play going to the right to set up Reed crossing for a pass at a 30-yard gain.
Yeah.
On the very first play of the game to kind of set the mood.
It was like first play of the game. It was like, yeah, this isn't going to be the same as last week, folks. Like we're going to be pulling out some, because we both kind of commented on like, are they going to be able to smoke and mirrors this for 2 straight weeks? Like that feels kind of tough. And they were like, yes, we can, but this time we're going to lean into the pass. We're going to zig when you think we're going to zag.
Yeah, and they used kind of a similar play later with the motion by Melton and the fake handoff to him, opening up Wilson to the left with blockers set up for the 30-yard touchdown. Plus, that was also a really nice job by Wilson navigating the blocking to find the end zone.
Yeah, there were still a lot of like well drawn up plays that were like, oh, this is just like kind of a gimme. Like they've found something here where it's like, okay, this is going to get you 15 to 30 yards. Like in addition to Malik Willis also executing at like a high level for a backup. But yeah, that Emmanuel Wilson screen, the Jaden Reed misdirection on the first play of the game. There were several plays like that where it's like, oh, like this is just like they found something here, and it's like, oh, that's just free right now.
Yeah, and so I just want to shout out those 2 plays because they really stood out to me. But there are other things as well that they were some nice downfield blocking by wide receivers in a couple of plays, like Heath helping Kraft steal the edge and Reed maintaining his block long enough for the Willis TD run.
Yep, I have Kraft marked as a positive as a blocker as well. The exterior blockers did a great job at the second level in this game.
Yeah, and Watson also had some downfield blocking on Wilson's touchdown reception. And I think we may have some overlap with this, but so I'm going to grab this now.
Okay.
The Packers were 6th on the week in yards per play at 6.4, and 2nd in the year so far in yards per play at 6.4 per teamrankings.com. I don't know if you want to bounce back to some of your stuff.
Yeah. We'll get through the positives. My next positive was something that I was surprised, and this was something that didn't feel like it as much during the game. But I did just want to shout it out because we talked about going into the game, it was going to be really hard to run along the interior with, the Titans being concentrated there with Simmons and Sweat kind of blocking up that middle. And in the beginning of the game, it did feel like they struggled to run up the middle. But when you look at the numbers per the end of the game, between Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson, so taking out quarterback rushing and taking out Chris Brooks, who had some, runs at the end of the game, in the A gaps, they ran 8 times for 36 yards, which is way better than I would have expected. That's, a little over, that's about 4.5 a carry. And then if you go just B gap to B gap, so that's, from between the left tackle all the way to the right tackle, you're looking at 13 carries for 65 yards, which is 5 yards a carry between the 2 backs. So they actually ran it up the middle quite well in this game, a lot better than I would have expected. And so I just wanted to shout that out because we were talking about that's going to be a really big issue for them. And shout out to Green Bay's offensive line, shout out to the running backs. They were able to get some push up the middle where they had kind of struggled previously.
And it didn't start out great either.
It started poorly.
They were not able to really get much up the middle with Jacobs.
I was like, why are we running it up the middle? We just run it to the edges, which is what...
Which was, I think, already known to be a weak spot. And exactly. Just to mention the edges, where this, I did not separate out the running back only, but run around the outside left and right, they're combined 10 carries for 60 yards. So that was successful.
Yeah, no, they had a really good day running the ball, just kind of wherever they wanted. And yeah, I just wanted to shout out that despite me yelling at the TV, like, hey, stop running it up the middle, they actually did a pretty good job of it throughout the game. Dad, any other positives on the offensive side, or should we maybe talk about a couple of things that we thought maybe could get cleaned up?
I have a few more positives I want to shout out. So the blocking on the right side of the line, no pressures allowed by either Tom or Ryan. And they also had the 2 best run blocking grades on the line. Tom
is having a fantastic season through 3 weeks.
He's looking so good out there. He has given up 0 pressures in 81 snaps. I don't know if that was pass blocking or not, which is 3rd in the league in the number of snaps without giving up a pressure.
He's so good. He's so good.
Who was it? Quentin Nelson was one, and the other one is maybe the Eagles.
Lane Johnson.
Lane Johnson might have been. I can't remember now who was the first one. But yeah, so he's doing really well. On the right side, had a good game. They also, I want to shout out Wilson's rush success rate of 58.3% was fourth best amongst running backs on the week, according to pro.nfl.com. And in that, so I take off the qualifiers because he didn't have that many carries.
Yeah. He is a legitimate second running back.
He's looking good.
Yeah. He is like arguably the best second back we've had since like second or third year Jamal Williams, it feels like. I mean, obviously it's very early and he's only played a couple games, but the way he's running, his right ability in the passing game is not bad either. Like, he's able to catch the ball a little bit. Like, he's contributing at a high level.
He's grabbing that number 2 running back job pretty tightly right now. And looking better than Jacobs on some runs.
Plays. Yeah. But Jacobs, it's a larger workload. And I thought Jacobs looked good in this game as well. But yeah, Wilson, after last week, Marshawn Lloyd had more carries than him last week. It was 6-5. And then, Lloyd is on IR now. And then we're like, okay, is Wilson going to take on the majority of those carries down? He did fantastic with that workload. He was great. He looks great out there. Really good. Yeah. Another diamond in the rough for, Brian Gutekunst and this, front office to find.
It's gotten to the point where, listen to some of the national fantasy podcasts, there are a lot of people who are noticing now
that Emmanuel Wilson is actually pretty good.
Looking good.
No, yeah. But yeah,
and then
any
one
other
last
positives?
Thing, as Willis led all quarterbacks of the week in yak per carry at 10.3 and yards per attempt at 12.2, and was second of the week in rushing yards with 73.
Willis is so funny. Wait, Emmanuel Wilson or Malik Willis?
No,
Malik Willis.
Malik Willis for quarterbacks.
Okay, Malik Willis. I was going to say this is so fun to watch run because you see him start to turn the corner, and he's a pretty big guy. But he has some real bursts, like getting upfield, and just he'll turn the corner, and I'm like, oh, like he's a lot faster than he looks, like because he's kind of a thicker guy. But when he gets up to speed, like he's got quite the top speed. I don't think he did any of the workouts at the combine, if I remember correctly, but I
think that was right. I think I tried to find his 40 time measurables when they first traded for him.
Yeah,
I was not successful.
I mean, we all knew he was an elite athlete, but he's fast even by NFL standards. Like, he's turning the corner and just sprinting clear of Titans defenders. But anyway, Dad, let's move on to maybe some negatives though on offense. It wasn't a perfect day for the offense, although it was a very good day. What was your first thing where you were like, okay, I wish they let's hope they improve on this next week?
I see we have overlap, so I will go on to some other things.
Okay. Let's start with the obvious. Let's start with the obvious thing. It's penalties, right? Like, that's the big thing.
Penalties. That was the first thing I had. So why don't you start?
Yeah. If there's one thing that you think Packers okay, they really need to clean this up, it's the mistakes. And whether that's on special teams, which we'll talk about later, or penalties. Right now, the Packers are the 5th most penalized team in the league per team rankings. In terms of penalties per game, they're at 8.7. A lot of them have been on the offense. In this game, 6 of them were on the offense, and that's not even counting an intentional delay of game penalty that they took. So 6 unintentional penalties and then 1 extra. It's just kind of setting them behind the sticks, and they were able to, overcome it in this game. But against better teams, you won't be able to. Rasheed Walker in particular has really struggled with penalties so far through 3 weeks. Other than that, he's played pretty well. It's just he's holding a lot and a few false starts, and he wasn't the only one in this game that was guilty of those, but he's definitely been maybe the biggest culprit of these penalties through 3 weeks. But overall, it's also just the line in general and just not quite being buttoned up in terms of, there's some illegal formation stuff, there's some illegal motion, there's some holding, there's some false starts. It's just a little bit off right now in the operation, and that's just something they need to get cleaned up, right?
Yeah, so I had 5 of the penalties were on the offensive line. 2 holdings on Jenkins. I think this is his worst game by far. He'd been playing really well. And then the hold and the hands to the face by Walker, and an illegal formation by Tom. And then there's the illegal shift by Melton. So some of these are shouldn't happen. The illegal shift and the illegal formation. You guys should have that cleaned up. That's just not paying enough attention to detail. I think Walker's going to have a bullseye on his back from the refs now. People have been talking about that. He's getting hit often enough with penalties early enough in the season that he's going to be under the microscope. Other negatives I had, it's that stalls of drives in the second half. Mm-hmm. So after the TD, on the short field, when the Titans failed on 4th down, They got ahead 27-7. And then there's a Tennessee touchdown that got it 27-14. So it's only a 2-score game. Then they had three straight 3-and-outs with a total of only 17 yards across those 3 possessions.
Mm-hmm.
And if the Titans had a better offense, they could have been back in the game. So that's a little,
Yeah, they let
worrisome.
him hang around a little bit. Matt LaFleur said, I think after the game, he was like being a little bit conservative there in the second half. And I just hope that conservative approach is more of an aspect of like, hey, I'm playing with my backup quarterback and I have the lead. Let's not do anything too crazy. I hope that conservative attitude play calling wise does not transfer over to when, Jordan Love is back. That's my, because I'm kind of willing to give them a little bit of a pass, be like, okay, I understand you want to be a little bit more conservative. Last week before the half, you take a knee, like that's fine. You're playing with your backup quarterback. Some of the rules of like when to be aggressive don't apply. And also, this is something I've been thinking about is like with the way offense is trending this year, do we need to rethink our attitude around aggression on 4th downs because of how poor the offenses have looked?
It's just been a generally poor year in the across the NFL in offense.
The way offense is down surrounding the NFL, do we need to rethink our approach to like, oh, you got to go for it on 4th down? Or are there more situations now where you should be taking the points? That's something I want to look at through 3 weeks is like, are there more times where you should be kicking a field goal than you would traditionally think, given, how the last 5 years of 4th down discourse have gone? Like, has some of that pivoted back? That's something I want to take a look at. Yeah, but the conservative approach, I understand when you have a backup quarterback. I just hope they're maybe a little bit more aggressive when Love is back, but that's a good point. They did let him hang around for like a quarter and a half extra that they didn't need to.
Yeah, and then Jacobs' rush success rate per
in this one
NFL was only 21.4%.
Yeah,
the 7th worst in the league out of 40 running backs.
Yeah, I thought he did all right with what was there, but yeah, it seemed like Wilson was able to find a little bit more. There was just better blocking for Wilson. I don't know.
And the pressure to sack ratio percentage was pretty high, even though there were only 7 pressures, but 3 of them ended up in sacks.
Yeah, that's a good point. But yeah, once again, some accident forgiveness playing with a backup quarterback. But yeah, no, that's a good point.
And their 3rd down conversion rate,
they were only
14 was they're only 5-14, which was a drop from last week where they were 58.8%.
Mm-hmm. They really did. I feel like take their foot off the gas a little bit in the
though it's still better than week 1 where they're only 27%.
Yeah. But anyway, let's move on to some things that make us think, though, in the offense. I think we have maybe 1 or 2 things each where it's like, okay, I don't think this is good. I don't think this is bad, but just wanted to touch on. Mine was Malik Heath. We got 11 snaps from him after no snaps week 1 and week 2. That was just something that I found interesting. I don't know if it was just a game plan specific thing, like, hey, we want our best blockers out there, our best perimeter blockers. But I just thought it was interesting that he didn't play at all week 1 and week 2. He played a good amount in week 3. I went and looked at the other receiver snap counts, like, oh, is one player like losing way more snaps than the rest? Man, it just kind of seemed like they took a few from each of the receivers and just gave them to Malik Heath. So I just thought that was interesting, maybe a little bit of a bigger rotation there. But that was the main thing that made me think.
Yeah, the two small things think about it is like, well, Lewis actually looking better than Jacobs in this game anyway.
You mean Wilson?
Sorry, Wilson.
Who is Lewis?
Nobody.
I was going to say I don't think there's even a Lewis on the roster.
There is no Lewis. Wilson looking better than Jacobs.
No, yeah, Wilson.
That's something that happened. That name pops into my head over and over again.
Just Lewis? Just the name Lewis?
Instead of Wilson.
Oh,
yes,
okay, fair.
I have to fight that, and I don't have a good explanation for that. And then is Sean Ryan playing the best football of his career right now?
You know what I'm going to say. I mean, he definitely is. Yeah, I'm just saying, like I think you could compliment him more than that. I think legit start is correct. When you say best football of his career, it's like he was not very good the last 2 years.
That is something that I have criticized the Packers on, saying like, so-and-so is playing the best football of his career. Well, it's like, that's
he was supposed to say he wasn't playing great the last 2 years, but no,
that's not actually saying they're good. So yeah, it might be more fair to say that Ryan's actually looking like a legit starter at guard.
Legit starting guard, and I don't know if he's going to give up that job when Morgan gets back healthy, hopefully soon. Knock on wood. But I thought, yeah, like you said, Sean Ryan looked great in this game. I thought Josh Myers looked really good in this game too. Especially Josh Myers through 3 weeks has looked great blocking in space. There have been times where
especially downfield.
And that's what they love about him, because he's huge, and he can move very well for his size. And that's always been the thing with Josh Myers, is the ability to do that stuff at a high level is so tantalizing that they've been willing to, work through some of the mistakes on more routine blocks, which obviously he needs to clean up. But the past 3 weeks, his blocking in space has been fantastic and has led to a lot of big plays.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe the best part of his game, and other players as well. Even if they, even Ryan, who we don't necessarily think of as necessarily a great mover, has been doing a good job.
Yeah,
on downfield blocks.
On the move. All the offensive line have really done a really good job downfield blocks. But Dad, anything else on the offensive side of the football you wanted to touch on, or should we move over to the defense?
I think we can move over to the defense.
All right, well, let's move over to the defense. And like we said, we're going to do a sandwich. I will say the defense was great in this game, so we're going to start with the negatives. But it was a really good day for the defense, holding the other team to only 14 points and scoring 7 yourself. So really a net 7-point allowed performance from the defense. They had 8 sacks, which, if I read correctly, was the highest sack total for the Packers since 2005. So that's awesome. It's wild that the week they get 8 sacks, another team in the NFL also gets 8 sacks. I don't know if you saw the Giants got Deshaun Watson 8 times. So it was a little bit, buried there. But Dad, let's start with the negatives, though. I did just want to,
even though you just went through some positives,
I did just want to preface. I didn't want to start entirely negative because the defense was really good in this game. I just want to end on the positives. But Dad, if there was something for the defense that you thought they needed to clean up, what would it be and why?
There were a couple penalties that were just sort of carelessness. The lining up off sides by Preston to negate the Gary sack on Tennessee's first touchdown drive, that likely would have forced a field goal try, and the neutral zone lineman on Kenny Clark.
Mm-hmm. The Preston Smith neutral zone infraction on the Rashawn Gary sack was a little bit frustrating. Where Preston was
Gary was frustrating because it had no influence on the play.
No influence on the play at all. And he's just lined up off sides. And
you're so
like, come
obviously
on, man.
You see us like, oh man, you're so far offside.
Just look
Nobody's
at the ball.
Miss that.
He's like, you're staring right at the ball. Like, if you can see it that clearly, you're probably offsides. But yeah, no, that wasn't ideal, but it is what it is.
And then the first possession by Tennessee, they had a 60% success rate, had 2 for 2 on third down, which was helped by that penalty, of course. And Tennessee was 2 of 2 in the red zone. The last thing I have is most of these are kind of small. Keyshawn was last on the team in separation when he was the closest defender to a targeted receiver. It's at 9.2 yards for the week. And the second worst was defensive back was McKinney at 4.5, and then Jair at 3.8. So a big drop there. Now I will say though,
I think separation for safeties versus corners is a little bit. I don't think you compare apples to apples there. I think you should compare safeties to safeties, corners to corners. But that's just my 2 cents.
But the difference when you're comparing corner to corner is even greater because then you go into Jair 3.8. Now I should put in the caveat that Keyshawn's playing the slot, which is really a different position than outside corner. And I did not have the time to, which I thought about doing, looking at every slot receiver, primary slot defense for every receiver on every team to see what their average separation yards for their receivers.
And my negative was very similar to this, but this is a stat from NFL Pro. The Packers allowed the second highest target separation in the league in Week 3, which means that pretty much when the Packers were giving up passes, they were very open. And part of that is a function of that target separation is going to be huge if the quarterback refuses to throw in tight windows and is only throwing to the open guys. And that's true. But there were definitely some open receivers in the middle of the field for Will Levis in this one. He threw, from the 10 to 15 yard mark, he was very money. When he was really throwing downfield, he threw that one pick to McKinney, and then underneath he was a little bit, maybe when he did throw, he was fairly accurate when he wasn't on his back or throwing interceptions. But that was my main thing, is that the throws the Packers were giving up were pretty open, especially in the middle of the field. There were 2 different drives for the Titans where they did kind of march pretty, automatically. But, that is going to happen. It is the NFL and it is an offensive league. So it is what it is. But I did just want to point that out, that they were giving up some open receivers a decent amount.
Yeah, but overall, these are kind of minor things compared to how well the defense played.
Yeah, because let's talk about the defense, Dad. The defense was really good in this game, and probably the reason that they won this game. What's your first positive takeaway for the defense?
So I think we may have some overlap here, but and I think I got different answers depending on where we went, but I had them as 8th best on the week in yards per play at 4.5, which is a big improvement on their first 2 weeks at 5.5 and 6.4 yards per play. This would be good enough for 3rd best in the year if they had done this every week. and it would actually have led the league last year with if you get a 4.5 yards per play.
Yeah, I mean, the defense was great. I just wanted to shout out the defensive line. Like we said earlier, 8 sacks, including a strip sack, and just the quality of the pressure. Through 2 weeks, we had talked about, is the D-line a problem? Or are they just doing this because they're playing against 2 very mobile quarterbacks? Like, this is going to be a bit of a litmus test game for the Packers defensive line, because if they can't get pressure in this game, then we have a problem on our hands. Because like we talked about going in, Will Levis is the most pressured quarterback in the league. Their offensive line really been struggling, especially on the right side. And the Packers took advantage of that. And it wasn't just the amount of pressure they were getting, it was the quality of the pressure. So if you look at it, in week 3, they were 15th in the league in pressure rate after being 18th and 20th in weeks 1 and 2. Where the big improvement came was in time to pressure. They were 17th in time to pressure in week 3 after being 25th and 30th in the first 2 weeks. They were getting to the quarterback so much faster in this game than they had been in the previous 2 weeks. And that was where the real difference came, is like they were getting fast pressure. Enigbare looked fantastic in this game. Smith, Gary, and Wyatt had 4 pressures each. Smith and Wyatt had 2 sacks each. I mean, they were just getting after the quarterback. They were bringing in packages that were like, it was just Van Ness, Enigbare, Smith, and Gary along the defensive line, and that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. Having Enigbare rush over the center, like head up, and get home immediately was something that kind of, did tickle my brain a little bit. I was like, oh, like, is he the type of guy who can kind of pinch inside? Like, I've never really seen them do that with him. I've seen them do it with Gary. I've seen them do it with Van Ness. I've even seen them do it with Preston a little bit. But Enigbare's always been a bit of an undersized guy. So to see him pinch inside was like, oh, that's a little interesting. We're going to keep an eye on that. But yeah, the defensive line in this game, Dad, I just wanted to shout out because I thought they were like the superstars of the game.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on the quality of the pressures this week. They converting sacks. Their pressure to sack ratio was 53.3%, 8 of 15, after being 12.5% and 9.1% the first 2 weeks. So they led the league in sort of sack conversion rate. Mm-hmm. And the second best team was Denver at 43.8%. So they were converting on their opportunities that they were creating.
Yeah, they were. And, some of those numbers can occasionally be noisy, pressure to sack conversion rate's a bit of a noisy stat. But, when you have Enigbare coming off the right tackle without the right tackle touching him and hitting Will Levis with a WWE move to force a fumble, I mean.
Yeah, and it wasn't a blown block. I mean, he had a blocker he had to beat. He just beat him instantly.
I was going to say, you could call it a blown block, though, with but
it wasn't
the
a blown assignment.
That's true.
I guess it wasn't a blown assignment where there was just nobody trying to block him. It
looked like it initially, though. It was like, wow, he got back there quickly. And because that's the thing, is like, it was like, dang, Will Levis is getting crushed back there. And there was some, Rashawn Gary comes out of this game, he doesn't have a sack, but he created a lot of sacks. I saw some people online being like, oh, Rashawn Gary, like, even in a game where they get 8 sacks, he can't even get a sack. Like, what's going on here? It's like,
well,
if you watch that game,
taken away by a penalty that had no influence on the play, and one of Van Ness's sacks was created by Gary's pressure.
Yeah, if you watch that game, he's creating for the rest of the rushers all day long. It's just one of those games where he's not the one to get home. But yeah, he was fantastic. But any other positives on the defense? I have a couple more too.
Yeah, so I had like the third down pressure rate. Preston was at 40% for the week, and Gary at 37.5%. They're both in the top 12 in the league on third down pressures, and Enigbare was at 50%, but he had fewer snaps, so didn't qualify among the leaders, but was actually even more efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he was great. None of the pass rushers had a bad day, I would say. The only one who kind of had a bad day is Kenny, who through 3 weeks has maybe been a bit disappointing, but hopefully he can pick it up as we go. The other player I wanted to shout out and highlight in this game was Isaiah McDuffie. I thought he had a really good game, especially against the run. 3 different run stops. And I just wanted to, from a more holistic view, I think he brings a level of physicality and aggression to this defense that has been lacking for 5 years, 6 years. I mean, the force that he plays with, and coming downhill, hitting hard, tackling. There's like a swing pass at one point where he just, he blew up the guy who was catching it. And I think any good defense needs to have that type of player who brings that energy, brings that aggression, brings that, extra physicality, even if they're not a star, just a tone setter on the defense. And I think McDuffie has kind of brought that through 3 weeks.
Yeah, and he comes in hard and with aggression, but doesn't miss the tackles. He doesn't whiff too much by coming in too fast.
Yeah, it's a kind of just, a better another example of like, okay, arm size is not everything for tackling. Arm length is not everything for tackling because McDuffie is a small guy, but he gets the guys to the ground. He's ferocious.
I think a player who's going to be like that is Cooper.
Cooper is fun, Dad. Cooper is a fun player to watch. He is so fast.
I've got some notes on him later that I'll
you know
talk about.
You know the thing about Cooper is, not to get too, like sidetracked, his arms look so comically skinny. Like comically skinny arms. I think it's because they're long. He is thinner armed. He has got that wiry strength, and just being next to entirely NFL players, I'm sure isn't helping him at all. But his arms look so skinny. But he's a great tackler. And he comes with,
what is it, SpongeBob meme?
Yeah, but he comes with force in like filling gaps. I thought he looked really good in this game. He actually played more snaps than Eric Wilson in this game, which I thought was also interesting.
That was one of my kind of things that made me think.
Yeah, thing that made me think. But let's talk a little bit about Cooper, because he came in on that blitz that was really good. I don't know if you saw the way they're using him is fun, and I think they could use him even more as a blitzer because he was elite at that at Texas A&M, and it seems like maybe they're going to start ramping him up with some of those packages there.
Yeah, so we're getting into the kind of things that made us think already being mentioned, but I'll go ahead and finish that. Yeah, so Cooper outsnapped Wilson 18-8. And I went through all of his plays. So half of those he had 9 snaps in nickel, where there's just him and Walker on the field as the two linebackers. So he's starting to get more of that role, which is something we saw early on in practices, that he was his early reps were as one of the 2 nickel linebackers, and then the other half were in base. He had that blitz for a sack, as well as
have you seen
like
the
he's
clip?
Making some good coverage snaps too when he drops in coverage. He's probably the best of their, maybe the best of the linebackers. So Wilson's had some good reps too in dropping in coverage.
And Quay, after really struggling last week, had a bit of a bounce back game in this one. He wasn't fantastic, but he was better in this one. But yeah, just to circle back on Cooper, have you seen the clip of him? Like, it's a run play to Pollard, I think. And he's mirroring like his movements and jumps essentially a whole gap across and just thumps him in the gap. Like, I mean, I think he's going to be a fun player, Dad. I think he's going to be really fun.
The other thing he does is he keeps hustling to the ball. You see like several plays I was watching of his where he comes in to help finish up the tackle. I don't know if he got credit for these, but he's always coming into the ball, even if he's running all the way across the field to help out with the tackles. He did it near the line of scrimmage. He did it on a play where I think maybe it was Quay was in the middle on coverage, and Cooper comes in from like the sideline to help finish off the tackle. So he's rallying to the ball really well as well.
And not to be like rah homer guy, like, oh, like how great are the Packers, but I think that's something that the defense has done really well as a whole through 3 weeks. Is I feel like they are always hustling to the football. You see Devontae Wyatt in this game; he has such a good motor. Running like if a play gets behind him, sprinting backwards
after Levis.
Exactly.
Like 15 yards downfield, he's still hustling.
But you see Lucas Van Ness like hustling for that fumble recovery, hustling for his sack when he loops around,
leading to a host of memes.
Yeah, memes. There's some good ones out there. But you see Enigbare hustling out there. I mean, I just think this defense as a whole is rallying to the football really well right now. And I just wanted to shout that out as well. The other thing that made me think, though, since we were still touching on that, is light boxes. In week 3, the Packers had the 3rd highest percentage of light boxes in the league, which is 6 or fewer, which is just interesting to me because you're playing against a team that, you're probably maybe a little bit more worried about the run than the pass. Although, for large swaths of that game, you were up by 2 scores, so that probably has something to do with it. But it was just something I wanted to, highlight. They're playing a lot of light boxes in this week, which as we're learning, Jeff Hafley's, his scheme, what he likes to do, which he's talked about, like they're running a lot of vanilla stuff right now. They're not running a lot of like custom designer stuff. But as we're learning like what he likes to do, I'm just keeping an eye on different patterns that are approaching.
Yeah. And I'll go on. You already mentioned this once, but it's one of the things that made me think is that I had at least twice on 3rd and long in the second half. They had no defensive tackles on the field. And all 4 of their edge rushers.
The classic NASCAR package. You remember back when it was like Nick Perry, Clay Matthews. I don't even remember who the rest they had out there at that point. I'm trying to remember. Was Kyler Fackrell on the team yet? It's like, I can't remember. Probably Julius Peppers at that time. But it was a good time.
And when they had that one time, they had, I think, Quay try to rush the passer. Both times it was when Walker and Edgerrin Cooper were on the field. And so one of those was the blitz from from Cooper in the NASCAR package to join the NASCAR package. And I think one time Quay Walker rushed while Cooper dropped back.
Yeah, it's
So,
interesting. They're sending some
and
linebackers.
both of those
yeah.
reps ended up in sacks.
Yeah, they're sending linebackers. I don't think they've sent like a DB on a blitz in. No, they did send McKinney on one in this game. That's true. But yeah, they were sending a lot of linebackers blitzing, not as many DBs. So that's just something I'm keeping my eye on because they did send Keyshawn a few times in week 1, but I don't think they've sent him since. So we're learning the patterns of this new defense as we go, and it's a fun little thing to open as we go. It's just layer by layer, peeling it back like an onion. But Dad, anything else on the defense you wanted to touch on, or should we move on to our favorite phase, special teams?
Well, as to they actually defending deep passes, so they've done well this year. They only had 2 attempts, and
one of them was McKinney.
One was a pick.
I mean, McKinney is just so freaking good. 3 picks in 3 weeks.
Yeah,
let's go.
And just shout at the defense as a whole. Like we've already got 7 picks in the year.
Had 7 all of last
what
year.
We had all of last year.
I mean, part of that is just noise awesome. And regression to the mean, but a lot of it is you can point when it's this big a difference. You can point to, yes, this has to do with the way they're being coached by Jeff Hafley, by the new defensive staff. I think it's clearly having an impact in their ability to play on the ball, and also it helps bringing in McKinney, who's going to finish those plays.
Yeah, I think it's just turnovers are a little noisy, but the difference between last year and this year can't just be noise.
Yeah. Exactly. But anyway,
so it's nice to see what's the difference in the safeties in the back end this year, and the philosophy to have eyes on the quarterback.
Exactly.
And one other thing I had is just kind of a defense as a whole. They were 3rd in the week on EPA per play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are great numbers. I'm sure you've already touched on several of these, but I mean, they were 5th lowest. Yeah, they were 3rd lowest in yards per carry. Also, they were 1st in rushing yards over expectation per attempt allowed. So they were defending the run really well. They were just defending as a whole really well. There are a bunch of numbers that I think some of these you've already said, so I won't read them out. But yeah, the defense was fantastic in this game.
Yeah, and their run defense overall this year
been pretty good.
Has been pretty good.
In for week 1, they struggled. And honestly, Jonathan Taylor got him a little bit too. So maybe it hasn't been fantastic, but it's been
maybe
better.
Some of that as the overall run defense has been buoyed a little bit by the defense against quarterback
running. Exactly. So I want to see them against more running back running teams, and because Saquon did pretty well against them and Jonathan Taylor did pretty well against them. So We'll see going forward. They defended the run well in this game, but it's still very early in the season and those 2 backs got them. So I won't say the running defense is fantastic, but
is fixed. Yeah,
it was good in this game.
But it is nice that compared to other years where every quarterback seemed to run great against us, and that has been a change.
At least we can defend quarterback run now, because before it was like, okay, we don't even have a prayer. Like we just have to beat them regardless.
It's like any backup
Tommy
coming
DeVito ran for 70 yards or something against us. Like that's when you should have known. And but anyway, Dad, let's move over to the special teams.
I see your note has not changed.
My note will not change. Kicker issues will continue until morale improves. Narvison, my guy, you are my diabetic brother. I love you, but we cannot be missing 1 sub 50-yard kick every game. It can't happen. When you look around the league at how good, look at how amazing kickers are this year. Like I don't think there's another kicker in the league who's missed 3 kicks besides him and Justin Tucker.
I'm going to say Justin Tucker of all people.
I was going to say Tua Tucker's are 50 yarders, but you're seeing Brandon Aubrey hit the middle of the net from 65 yards out. You're seeing Kaimi Fairbairn for the Texans just 55, 55, 59, just back to back to back, no problem. And you're just seeing all these kickers around the league. It's the golden age of kickers, and you just cannot, in the year of 2024, miss 3 sub 50-yard kicks in 3 weeks. I'm sorry. I know this one got called back to penalty, and maybe he makes it if Simmons isn't doing a pull and shoot, and he's got thrown off by that illegal pressure from the left side. But at the same time, he's
missing the same way every time.
Yeah, you're missing wide right from under 50 yards, in every game, and so it's like that needs to get cleaned up. Obviously, they're going to give him, we're going to see how it goes. At least he didn't end on a miss. He made his last kick, which was his furthest kick so far. So if you want to be, optimistic, that's progress. I think it was a 47-yarder, right? It was his longest kick of his career so far. So progress, but that needs to get cleaned up because you can't miss a sub 50-yard kick. Like even one is like, man, that's tough. But 3 in 3 weeks, that's really tough.
Yeah, and then I think that miss may have influenced their decision to not go for a long field goal later, which would have been 55. And if you look at the surrender index, it's like 95th percentile to punt there when you're in the 38. But some of this we talked about earlier. Maybe the surrender index is a little bit different this year because of the. I
was going to say, I think some of the math might have to change with how offense has struggled and how scoring has just been way down across the league. I think some of the math is going to have to change.
But that punt that they ended up with in the when they took the deliberate delay of game. So, but let's say when they're at the 38, they only netted 17 yards.
Yeah,
on that punt, from where they were. So that.
Can we talk about
the Packers fake on fourth down is the worst in the league?
Which one?
Well, in general, when they're pretending to go for it on fourth, trying to draw the penalty.
I've seen worse. I don't think it is the worst in the league. I've seen worse. I don't think it is.
It's not credible.
No one jumps on these. It's always obvious. It's always very obvious. But
maybe it's just every team. But I watch it as like nobody thinks you're going for it. What's this stupid charade?
Yeah, but I mean, you're just
actually go for it once. What is this? Just actually go for
it. But I wouldn't want you to do it with a 2-score lead with your backup quarterback. Like I'm all right with just
like some of these. This is sort of my
I won't
get
too mad on like decision making and aggression with like a backup quarterback, but
right,
I would hope that the more conservative approach does not carry over to when Love is back. I will say though, Danny Whelan almost had one of the greatest punts I've ever seen. He was about a half a foot away from.
He backed up the wedge. He hit a wedge and had it back up.
It was a long wedge too. Like he was about to hit him at the 1 yard line from like 50 out or something. I think it was a longer punt. But I just wanted to shout out Danny Whelan. He's quite the punter. He's pretty good.
Yeah, and so also another thing about this, especially is like the penalty for illegal formation.
Yeah,
on Mosby, where it forced a repunt that cost him 20 yards.
That can't happen. Yeah.
Where it was a great punt, had him at the 10, and then a 5-yard penalty, had to redo it, and ended up on the 20. Yeah. On the 30.
And coming back from, I think last year they were the most penalized special teams. They've been better about it this year, but you can't have 15. You can't have penalties costing you 20 yards. Like that just can't happen in a game. In a closer game, that'll hurt you.
Yeah. So that's the thing. You got to clean. So many of their penalties seem to be mental errors where they're just not paying enough attention to detail.
They're just playing a little sloppy right now, which, thankfully hasn't burned them too much in 2 of the 3 weeks, but it will going forward, so they need to clean that up. But, sometimes that's where you want to be at, is with a couple of wins under your belt and some things that you can get better at. There's room for improvement on the team. But anyway, let's wrap things up here, Dad. Final thing, player of the game, who you got?
It's got to be Malik Willis.
It's got to be. It has to be Malik Willis. He was so good.
Yeah, it's not just that, like last week where they kind of really gimmicked a game plan around with 14 pass attempts and 50.
Yeah, it was like shrink the length of the game as much as possible. 53 running plays. Like we're not even going to worry about the pass. We're running it back to 1940. This week, Malik Willis looked good. He looked really good.
And they had all kinds of different pass plays that they opened up for him.
And like traditional drop back stuff. And it's like, okay, like let's cook a little bit. Like, let's see it. But no, there's no one else you can pick. The only other argument I think is either an offensive lineman like Zach Tom, maybe,
right.
Or
that was, let's say, like the second pick would probably be Zach Tom because he's given up no pressures.
Yeah, or Emmanuel Wilson or Jair Alexander. Those are like the only other arguments I'd really hear, and maybe one of the D linemen, maybe Enigbare. But just to shout them out, but it has to be Malik Willis. I mean, round of applause for this guy coming in, and it's like. You have no one has any expectations. I can't tell you the number of national podcasts I was listening to where they're like, Malik Willis, like, if he's not the 32nd best quarterback in the league, he's the 31st. Like I so many different people were just slandering Malik Willis. They're like, and slandering the Packers for even having Malik Willis. It was like some flaw of the Packers that Malik Willis was like on their roster. It was like, I can't believe the Packers didn't take like backup quarterback more seriously. And hand up, I had some concerns about him coming in right away, and I was like, last week I was like, if this week doesn't go well, like they might need to make a move for week 3, and last week was, they kind of, scotch taped their way, duct taped their way, MacGyvered their way into a win, but then this week is just, Malik Willis is like a good backup quarterback. Like, he's going to hang around the league, like, as a backup quarterback. And he's kind of saved his career because I think you could argue this was maybe his last chance. And to get a last chance where it's not exactly the best case scenario, like, oh, I've only been here 3 weeks and like we're playing against these defenses and I just have to do what I can do. And for that to be kind of, your one last shot and for him to make the most of it this way. And everything you hear about him is he's a fantastic locker room presence, fantastic guy, great work ethic. And I'm just so happy for him that he was able to, put on a show and I think elongate his career with these 2 games.
Yeah, and I'll admit I was one of those guys who was a little salty especially when I saw like the Dolphins signing Tyler Huntley, because like, why didn't we get him? But Willis has been playing well.
We got
doing
better,
everything they need him to do.
We got better Tyler Huntley at home. We got Malik Willis, baby. But anyway, so we'll see if this coming week against the Vikings. We don't know if it's going to be Jordan Love yet. Hopefully it will be, but we'll see. They said they're going to give it day by day, and then if it's not, it's going to be Malik Willis again, and we'll see. And regardless of if it is Malik Willis, regardless of how that game goes, like, he's still been fantastic as a backup. Hopefully Jordan Love is able to, get medically cleared on that knee and is able to go for Sunday. But we'll be keeping you up to date with everything for that game. We'll be doing an episode later in the week previewing that game. But Dad, as we wrap up this game against the Titans, Packers 2-1, second in the North. They're tied for second in the North. Is there any final thoughts you want to impart on our listeners, or should we wrap things up here?
Well, I would say that we've gone through these 2 weeks better than anybody could have hoped for, could have expected.
Yeah, going 2-0 with a backup is like going 1-1 is the situation you hope for. You're like, oh, please, like, let us just go 500 with the backup. Going 2-0 is like super gravy on top. Like, I don't even know, like, there's no more, metaphors for that.
Right. It's like whatever your favorite topping is.
Yeah.
That
2 of those and make it a double. And make it a double.
Make it a double. That little extra bit of enhancement. Whatever it is you like to put on top of your dinner,
ice cream,
your Sunday, whatever
exactly.
It is.
It's perfect. But anyway, yeah. So shout out again, Malik Willis. Amazing work as a backup. His looked fantastic in these 2 games. We'll be keeping you up to date on Jordan Love's status and whether he'll be good to go in Week 4 against the Vikings. And we'll be keeping you up to date on everything on that game. Once again, check us out on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. Subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, whether it's Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. We're back on YouTube. But anyway, like we said, we'll keep you up to date. Hopefully Love is back next week. And until then, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.